The pseudo elements before and after are used for a variety of purposes in CSS, the most widespread one being as part of a clear fix to prevent boxes with floated elements from collapsing. You see one up here, and I talked about this earlier in the movie about the flow root value. With the introduction of flex and grid, pseudo elements suddenly got an interesting new use as true items of grids and flexible boxes. You see, if you have a pseudo element appended to a flexible box or a grid container, that pseudo element automatically takes up a slot in that container as a flex or grid item. Now, this can be used to do some very interesting things, and it can also cause all sorts of interesting problems. So let me just show you what happens when you add a pseudo element to a grid here. So I've already marked it up, and I'll just uncomment it. In this example, we grab demo area UL, so that's this unordered list here that's displayed as a grid. And then we say, before this item, we want to just put in a new element that says, I'm before the pseudo element. So save that, and look at that. The before element appears inside the grid as a true grid item. And as a result, all the other grid items get shifted to the right and down to accommodate this new element. If I then also add an after element to the same grid, you'll see that gets added here at the bottom as a true grid item. So now we have 2 extra grid items we have to account for. This is what I mean when I say pseudo elements become true children of a grid or a flexbox. They really take up space within the grid or flexbox, which may cause some interesting problems from time to time. So let me just comment out these again and then activate a clear fix instead. So this is something that I've come across myself in my own code, and it took me a while to figure out what was going on, which is why I'm adding it here in the course. So if you apply a clear fix to all elements within a page, something that's very normal to do in CSS frameworks and things like WordPress themes, very strange things start happening with your grids and your flexible boxes. So look at this now. When I save this, you'll notice there's this weird line that appeared at the bottom of my grid. And if we scroll down, you'll also see there's a weird line that appears on the right-hand side of the flexbox. So what exactly is happening here? Well, we have to look closely at the code of the grid and the flexbox. So if we look at the grid, you'll see, let's see, where is it? Here, the grid has a gap of 0.5 rems, which is what's causing the gaps to appear here. And what we're seeing at the bottom is the gap, and then there's a box underneath. So a grid item, but the grid item is nothing, so therefore it's just showing the gap. And the same thing happens in the flexible box. There's an additional item over here on the right-hand side, but it's collapsed to 0 because the current definition of this clear fix is that the size is 0. So therefore, a cell is being taken up here, and it's being taken up over here, but nothing is being displayed. As a result, if you're not aware that this is what's happening, you'll sit there and try to figure out how to get rid of this gap, either by setting a negative margin or think that maybe it's a padding or there's some overflow problem. But what's actually happening is we have this invisible grid item. The easiest way to see what's going on is to go into the developer tools. Here we have our unordered list for the grid. And at the bottom, we can see after. And when I hover over it, you can see here, there is a grid item there, but the height of the grid item is 0, so therefore you can't see it. But that's what's causing the content to bump down. Same thing in our flexible box. If we inspect this element here and then go to after, on the right-hand side over here, there is an item, but that item has a height of 0, so therefore it doesn't appear. That's why we have these overflows, and that's why it's very important if you're using grid or flex in your project to not apply a clear fix just globally to every element because it'll cause problems like this. But just as importantly, it's worth knowing that you can now introduce additional elements to your grids and your flexible boxes by using before and after. And this can be used in some really interesting circumstances to add additional information or to add additional features to your grids, as you'll see in the next movie.